So for those of you watching, welcome to Origins, Colorado. This is a Front Range group that we're going to cover Origins apologetics issues and lots of other fun stuff. So I want to welcome Aaron Foster. He's a youth pastor here at Christ Centered Community Church and an excellent barista, I must
Thank
say.
you.
And then Noah Myers. He works with students at Colorado State University and Ratio Christi. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, Ratio Christi is how we should pronounce it.
Excellent.
But everyone says Ratio Christi, actually. So.
All right. So tonight, our topic or group of topics is aliens, exoplanets, supernaturals, and origin of life. And you wouldn't really think those all go together, but they actually do in some really strange ways. So first off, I was going to ask, do you guys have any questions right off the bat with any of these topics?
I mean, there's all sorts of different questions. Aliens is one that I haven't myself dove into a ton.
Yeah.
Especially how biblically that might roll in, you know, outside of as someone going into apologetics a lot, you know, the idea of aliens a lot or intelligent life on other planets is a lot of times viewed as that could be evidence against God more than anything. Because if there's other intelligent life out there, then it's more likely that we weren't created, supposedly.
Right.
Supposedly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's actually interesting because I've been in a small group with my church. They're called life groups or micro churches, and 2 or 3 of the people in our group are really into kind of ancient aliens and kind of the end times with some of this alien stuff. The others are like, what in the world? You guys are like, you guys are out there. So it's something that hasn't been explored in the church too much, although creation, I know the website's creation.com, it's the Institute for Creation Research, has just they have a book called Alien Intrusion, and they are just putting out a documentary video from that book called Alien Intrusion, where they explore space travel and a lot of these issues that we're going to kind of hit tonight. So if you guys are interested, just look up Alien Intrusion, and you can watch the trailer. It's coming out soon, but you can pre-order it. But one of the questions I get from people is aliens, like, isn't that a pretty marginal issue? Like, what's the big deal? And it's interesting because on one of the videos I watched, one of the surveys was 1 in 4 Americans claim to have had some kind of either alien, UFO, or supernaturalish experience that they would call foreign kind of alien contact. And over 40 million Americans have claimed to see a UFO from different polls.
That's higher than I would have expected.
Yeah. So
it is relevant.
Yeah. So it's, and then the other is our movies, books. You know, everything from Independence Day to Contact back in, was that the 90s when Contact came out?
There's been a new one lately.
Yeah. There's 5 or 6 movies. Passengers,
Arrival.
Life is another one. The Alien series, so it's inundated our culture, and so if you want to kind of learn more about why an alien god would appeal to today's culture, there's a great YouTube video by Michael S. Heiser, and it's why an extraterrestrial god appeals to today's culture. And he goes in depth into some of the research, scholarly research on this, and the cults that have sprung up around UFOs and aliens, and even ministries, Christian ministries that help people deal with alien interference in their lives, oppression, as it were. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But there's a ministry called alienresistance.org. And their sole purpose is to help people who are being afflicted essentially with with what they would term alien presences and stuff. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing. And how many of you guys like the History Channel?
I love it.
Yeah. So there's a certain little show on the History Channel called Ancient Aliens.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen it and watched
I
it.
have. One time.
I've watched several episodes, and then my wife comes in the room and is like, "What are you watching? Let's do something else." But Ancient Aliens, they basically go in to history, Egyptians, Sumerians. They use the work of Zecharia Sitchin and others to try to say that the supernatural encounters, even in the Bible, are aliens, and that the Bible supports alien presence throughout human history.
Yeah.
And for them, they want the aliens to come back now, and that would be their confirmation that yes, the aliens have kind of maybe seeded life on Earth, and at times step in to humanity and give us technology, redirect us, do something like that. And it's very much its own belief system and religion. But an interesting website and video series you guys should check out is called ancientaliensdebunked.com. And this gentleman has gone through all of the Ancient Aliens series and gone through and looked at the examples they use. For example, in South America, there's little gold figurines, and some of them look like jets and airplanes. They have kind of a body with these fins and some stuff like that. And what the Ancient Aliens people don't tell you is there was hundreds of these found. All of them are of animals, known animals, and the ones that look like airplanes actually are of fish that have a very similar shape. And on the fronts of the wings, there's like these little curls. And those same curls are on the fins of the fish. And so we know these figurines are of fish, not of airplanes. But that's something that the Ancient Aliens show neglects to tell you. And for example, another one is the giant stones of Baalbek. It's a temple in the Middle East, and these are huge, huge stones. They're actually part of a retaining wall that a temple was built on. And the Ancient Aliens guys will say, this was a UFO landing pad, and there's no way humans could move these huge stones. Well, there's actually records of how the Romans used those built machines and moved those stones and placed them. And we actually have drawings of the machines. And they actually did the same thing when the temple was built in Jerusalem. They had huge retaining stones that they put in place when the temple was built. And so he goes into that. It's fascinating just on the technology of ancients in a lot of ways, showing that ancient people were not stupid. They were brilliant, including the Romans, the Egyptians, and other things. So,
But no, so many of those structures, we're still trying to even understand how some of those were made. Like the pyramids, we have some pretty good theories, but we're still not 100% sure if those theories are the way they did it. So even with those pyramids, like you can't get a piece of paper in between these giant stones. They were just that perfectly molded together. Which is crazy.
And there's that guy I follow who believes that not all the pyramid stones, but some of them were actually re-agglomerated stone, which is they were able to chemically mix limestone, and then it would set up like concrete, and it would look almost like regular limestone. And so they actually created synthetic concretes or synthetic stones. And so that's fascinating. He's been able to recreate the technology. So he's from France, he actually has a company that creates everything from countertops to statues with this reagglomeration process. And he has several books trying to prove or show how he thinks the ancients had this technology and stuff. So that's really fascinating, tying in with the pyramids. So one of the big guys in the Ancient Aliens is Zecharia Sitchin, and if you are interested in learning more, and Dr. Michael S. Heiser has a website called Sitchin Is Wrong, or You can just look up Michael Heiser and Sitchin, and he goes into Sitchin's where he tries to reference Sumerian tablets, the Anunnaki, ancient aliens, and other stuff like that, and he goes through and explains and debunks and explains a lot of that. And he also goes into the biblical text and shows you how Isaiah's throne with the wheels within the wheel is not a spacecraft and stuff, and how the ancients, what it really was and stuff. So that's really fascinating with kind of the ancient aliens.
Stitchin's the one with the really weird hair in that show.
No, that is Sitchin is actually dead now.
Oh, okay.
Spacing on the guy's name.
I'll look it up.
He has really, really. It's like he was in a wind tunnel for too long, and there's a couple of those guys who were pretty into it, I would say. And I would say the ancient aliens. This is a great question I got in. Is what does aliens have to do with evolution? And if aliens, physical beings, ever showed up, that would be like the evolution's triumph, because that would be their answer to how life arose. And one of the biggest challenges to natural progressive evolution is how did we get life? It's so intricately designed, it had to have come from some type of intelligence. Because every time we see information, there's a source intelligence behind it. And information itself, you actually covered this in one of your groups, is immaterial. But it expresses itself in the material. So, letters in a book, for example, this book, this isn't the actual information. It's the way the information is conveyed, but it's ink on paper. The material itself is not the information. The information supersedes the medium. And the same way with DNA. The information in the DNA supersedes the molecules, the way it's put together and stuff. So that is just fascinating. But as with kind of the Prometheus aliens thing, they're like, we have engineers who seed life on the planet. And but the problem with that is it just moves that question to another world, another galaxy, another far, far away. And if it's our kind of life, because people ask, well, what if it's a different kind of life form? And I'm like, well, that's about as fanciful a question as, Tinkerbell and how Tinkerbell affects our lives. It's like, you can't observe that, so it's an interesting question, but there's no basis really for that.
I think it's interesting because so many people want to push that question back on us when we're like, well, we came from God.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, then where did God come from?
Yeah.
But when they're going to throw in this whole alien seediness on the earth, like origin of life comes from these aliens, they're not thinking about, well, now you have to explain to us where those aliens came from.
Yeah.
As if like that somehow avoids the question, but God doesn't. Like,
So how would you answer that question? Where did God come from?
Well, for me, I think philosophically, he exists outside of time. So time is really, it's his creation. So he exists outside of it. I mean, if you created something, you have control over it. You supersede it. You're above it. You're beyond it. So to me, I know that's probably an oversimplistic answer, but it satisfies me, I think. That makes him eternal. That makes him God. It's one of his characteristics, is his eternalness. Because if God isn't eternal, then he's truly not God. Capital G.
And the Bible says he's spirit, which means he's not material. So he's not bound by time. He's not made of material or energy per se. And all those things have to have an origin because they're subject to entropy and decay, which is fascinating. So, but if we look at physical aliens, they have to have an origin. So when people ask that question, they're missing that God is an outer dimensional being. And almost every alien that ancient aliens or movies have ever come up with, they're physical entities. The closest would be the movie Knowing, where these entities are kind of immaterial, kind of light, but that's still physical. So we would say God is outer dimensional, but he can manifest in this dimension. He can enter it, but his essence is outer dimensional. Yeah. So that's, yeah. So I think that's a great answer to where did God come from, because he's not made up of parts. He's not subject to the physical world, like every other physical alien would be for Origins. Yeah. So that brings us to a question that a friend of mine, Gabe Mayberger, he's into creating it's a drive that, like in Star Trek, it's called an I'm trying to remember the name. Alcubierre drive. Creates a warp bubble and different stuff like that. And so one of his things is space travel possible. So for aliens to get here, our nearest star is millions, billions of light years away. So the problem is space is not empty. And this is actually one of the things the Alien Intrusion movie brings up in some of their trailers, is there's so much dust and rocks in space that if you're traveling through physical space, you have particles coming at you as fast as you're going. And either without some amazing shielding or doing interdimensional travel, which gets us into the supernatural being realm, you have to deal with running into debris in space with your ship and it punching a hole in your ship and blowing you up because of how fast you're traveling. So that to me was really, it's kind of fascinating.
And all it really takes is like one atom that you run into. So it's not even like you ran into a small rock. Just an atom traveling at that speed is enough. You just kind of think of that in the same way we see car accidents just happening at 60 miles an hour, and you're like, you look at a car and how mangled it is. That's a piece of metal that we think of it being very strong. And it's mangled going 60 miles an hour. You get something that's going light speed. That's all it takes. Just an atom and the whole thing's done.
So even if you have a gravity travel, like UFOs are supposed to have, where you can defy gravity, you're still going to deal with stuff in your way, and heat and friction and all those crazy things. So that brings us kind of to exoplanets. Now, have you guys seen any articles recently on exoplanets or different stuff?
Like new planets that have been discovered? I know CNN, I saw an article, I think they discovered 7 planets that are kind of in that, at least from the distance from their sun, that are in that kind of Goldilocks zone, that would make it sustainable for life. Which is big. I think there's maybe even one other 2 planets before that, and then now these 7. There's some things within those 7 they've already ruled out, like 2 or 3 of them for being able to sustain life. But that was pretty significant from what I've heard.
And there's some, if you want to research this from a biblical kind of creation standpoint, go to searchcreation.org. Just type in exoplanets, and you'll find a lot of really cool articles. Searchcreation.org searches the top 10 supernatural young Earth creation websites. It doesn't search theistic or old Earth creation websites, which reasons to believe would have some cool stuff on exoplanets too. And especially because Hugh Ross is an astronomer. But one of the biggest challenges to life in outer space is, you mentioned the Goldilocks zone. So that's the distance something is away from its star for temperature. And then they're like, ooh, liquid water. So you have to have liquid water to exist. Because there's some articles that just came out, and there's been some in the past that Mars actually had water on Mars, and it was in a liquid state, and most probably from recent volcanism. The problem with recent volcanism on Mars
Volcanism meaning?
Volcanoes shooting out water from inside the planet.
I'm also thinking, isn't there like Vulcan creatures and Star Trek or
something? No.
Just making sure I'm on the right page.
Not the Spock, not the Spock type of volcanism, but Vulcan is not on Mars. Yeah, with Spock and those guys. No, this is volcanoes because part of our atmosphere is sustained by volcanoes on Earth. And so if you get enough volcanic activity, that creates an atmosphere that spews water into the atmosphere, and it actually can hold water on the planet.
And traps greenhouse energy.
Yeah, that's why actually search Ian Juby Genesis Week. His latest episode talks about how a warming Earth and more greenhouse gas is actually better for the planet. Plants do better, and then the animals do better, and then the humans do better. So you actually want global warming. And he's in Canada, so that's his. He's like, make Canada warmer because we have a lot of fossils and stuff from Canada showing that it was a more temperate climate at one time.
Much more.
Yeah, much more. Even jungles in Antarctica and stuff. And so we at one time had a warmer planet. And some cool stuff happening with that. So he's like, take us back to the glory days, which I found interesting. So so exoplanets, there's actually over 100 factors for the origin of life. So one of the biggest things, it's not just liquid water, it's what type of atmosphere you have. And if you guys did you go to public school?
Yeah.
Did you?
Public school.
Okay. So if you're in public school a long time ago, like some of us, or recently, you'll probably run into Origin of Life, the Miller-Urey experiments, where they tried to make the early Earth's atmosphere and then add energy and try to get amino acids, proteins, molecules, and stuff. Ultimately, those experiments failed, and they also had intervention. So once they got an amino acid, they pulled it out of the reaction. Otherwise, it would have gotten destroyed a couple of seconds or minutes later. So they interfered with a natural experiment.
Right.
And the so life is made up of left and right-handed amino acids. They always, life starts out with a balance. I think it's all left-handed, and when something dies, it reverts to right-handed. They only got right-handed amino acids like tar and cyanide out of their experiments.
Okay.
So they didn't get living amino acids, they got dead ones too from their mix. They also used an atmosphere with no oxygen. Why would they use an atmosphere with no oxygen in it?
Oxygen is destructive in a sense.
Yeah. That's the whole thing
Oxidation.
about... Yeah, that's the whole thing. You need to eat really good because there's free radicals in your body. It's oxygen. It oxidizes things just like rust on a car. And so one of the challenges is if you have oxygen in the atmosphere, which water is made up of oxygen, then you have basically, it tears things apart. If you have something in water, you have what's called hydrolysis happening. Water tears things apart. You put a dead fish in the water, it's going to fall apart really quick. Even plastics fall apart in the ocean. It takes a lot longer, but they still deteriorate in water.
Would they argue that you wouldn't have had oxygen just because you don't have plant life before?
Yeah. So here's the challenge, though. If you don't have oxygen, you don't have an ozone layer. If you don't have an ozone layer on Earth, what happens to Earth?
It fries.
It fries. It gets radiation from its sun every single day and kills everything. So you have life that forms one day. Ah, yay! The sun comes up, kills it. That's why they're trying to go deep ocean to try to have life happen in the deep ocean. But then you still have the oxygen and water problem. So if you have oxygen in the atmosphere, you can't get life. If you don't have oxygen on the planet, you get radiation and X-rays and all those crazy things from the stars, the nearby sun, and that kills off all life. So you can't get life with oxygen, and you can't get it without it.
The start of it.
Yeah, the start of it.
Right.
Because you have to have a cell membrane to protect it. And so that's one of the interesting things that most people don't understand with origin of life. It's not just the right distance and liquid water. There's over 100 factors.
Yeah.
What type of star? How much radiation is it spitting out?
Right.
And almost all the planets they found, these 7 planets, don't rotate. They're too close to
really?
their stars.
That's a problem.
So they
Yeah,
might be
that's
in the
neat.
Goldilocks zone, like distance from their star. But
Right.
if they don't rotate, or they rotate too fast or too slow, that messes things up again. And then what's their gravity? If gravity's too strong, then
Crushes it.
then it crushes everything. If it's too weak, you have other issues. And so there's a fine tuning that goes on for even life to exist. And evolutionists have proposed our universe is one of multiverses. Because they can't get around that fine tuning of this universe for
Right.
life. And so they're like, well, we must be one of billions of universes, which is not scientific,
Right.
never been observed, can't be reproduced. It's a supernatural belief.
Right.
So if you run
Right.
across a scientist who believes in the multiverse, they're a supernaturalist. Just as supernatural as someone who believes in
Creator God.
yeah, the creator God.
And fairies.
Yeah, and fairies.
Right.
and stuff like that.
Pick and choose, yeah.
Yeah. But we would say life came from life. It doesn't contradict the law of biogenesis like abiogenesis of evolution does. It's just the life form that this life came from was non-biological. So I would call it also, since God is not just an outer dimensional being, he is a non-biological entity. And it makes sense
Right.
that DNA as a program would come from something that's not, DNA is subject to death and decay, at least at this time. It came from something that was greater than itself. Because we make computer programs, and they're much more limited than we are currently. AI hasn't taken over yet, even though people are really scared of that. That's been in the news lately too.
Right.
But DNA actually shows in its structure and its makeup that some non-biological entity designed and engineered it, which is really cool that a biological program could come from a non-biological entity. And that's actually more logical than it coming from another biological entity,
Right.
if that makes sense. And so we as biologics have created digital computer information programs and stuff. So there's some cool things to rattle around in that. But if you guys have a question at any time, jump in too.
Well, I was reading an article recently on this topic, and a number of years ago, they put the number of possible life-sustaining planets. It was in the tens of thousands. I mean, there was just
Oh, really?
yeah,
Didn't
a
realize it was
ton.
that high.
And now, as
Yeah.
science has progressed, and this observation has progressed,
Yeah.
the number gets smaller and smaller and
Right.
smaller, and because, as you said, the criteria is just incredibly.
It keeps expanding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're learning more about the criteria, and then
Yeah.
these. I mean, it's down to, what did you say recently that you saw?
Well,
a
I
few.
knew that they found 7 that they're like these could have
Right.
life just for that first principle or
Right.
for that first thing of being in that zone. It's at
Yeah.
the right type of star
Yeah.
and the right distance away from it, that it's not
Yeah.
too hot or cold.
Right.
That pretty much was all that they had figured out, and everyone's freaking out about it.
Right.
But the thing is like all of those things, those are the anthropic principles, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So all of those different factors that need to be there, they basically were like, we have hundreds of these different factors that a planet needs to sustain life. And they got all excited because we found 7 that fit one of them.
Right.
And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I mean, whoop-de-doo.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Yeah.
you've only just started to crack the surface
Exactly.
Yeah.
of
Right.
getting there.
And that might be the most observable criteria. I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but I would think
Right.
that distance from a sun might be the most observable criteria.
That's
and
actually
then
how
from
they.
there.
Yeah, that's actually how they found these planets. Was they look at a star and they see if anything's passing in front of that
Right.
star.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is we're in the right spot to actually see a planet cross a star.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's pretty.
Wild.
Yeah, wow.
Right.
So they measure how that star fluctuates and see if there's something passing in front of it, and then they can. It's amazing the measurements we can do of
Yeah.
something that's billions of light years away.
Right.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's also kind of interesting when we talk about this is there's this kind of in a way, when people are looking at, are there other planets that could sustain life? It's kind of like they're saying, well, if we find another planet that sustains life, then that proves that God isn't necessary, because we've shown that there's multiple times that it happened and we kind of hit the lotto, so to speak.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they also argue, looking at some of the other things that we see on the earth, that we're like, well, it's not perfect, which we say it's because the world's fallen.
Mm-hmm.
But they look at that and say, well, if God created it, then this world should be perfect and shouldn't have all those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's kind of this damned if you do, damned if you don't. So if we were to see that every planet in the universe sustained life, they'd look at it and say, it's not that big of a deal. All of them have it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the other end of it, if we're looking at it and seeing very clearly that we're the one planet and all of these that fit all of these principles that we need, they're like, well,
and it's not perfect.
It's not perfect,
Yeah.
So it's like, well, what do you want here?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this is the best. If God's trying to prove himself to us, this is the best answer to all of that, because he's showing one instance and all of these other instances that we're also on a planet to observe, because we could have been on a planet that had all of these principles to have, but we wouldn't be able to look out and see the world and see, wow, we're really unique.
Mm-hmm.
We really nailed the jackpot here.
Yeah.
To me, that would be the most clear way for God to show us, hey, I made this happen this way, and this isn't just random chance, or it isn't just easy to happen. It couldn't have just all of the planets sustained life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it brings up one of the things when I was a kid and I watched Contact was, I think it's Jodie Foster asked this, isn't this wasted? If there is a God, then this is just wasted space. Like, why is space so huge, so infinite? And if we're the only ones here, that's a lot of wasted space. And so one of the questions is, well, does the Bible say there is no other life forms out there? And the Bible, there's a lot of things the Bible doesn't tell us about our planet. Even of supernatural beings, it doesn't explain the whole story to us necessarily. But there's a couple different answers or factors that I like to look at with that. Is space wasted? Or are there other beings out there? If there were other physical beings out there, God could have created them and just chosen not to tell us. They're not part of our story with him. And the Bible actually says there are other beings out there. And we're going to get into kind of who are those beings. The other kind of thing I look at, which I explained to your students, was this is the beginning of the human story. And if, even if man had not fallen, would we have gotten beyond earth? A perfect humanity? And what about after resurrection, when Christ comes back? Are we just going to be happy on this planet? Or will we be able to travel interdimensionally in supernatural bodies to other planets, to other places in the solar system? So was the universe actually made as our playground? And we just messed up getting there, essentially. God's like, I made Earth. This is your domain. You do good with it. Maybe there's more to it. And again, the Bible doesn't tell us specifically, but that's why I love science fiction. I love watching Star Trek, because in some ways that's dream building to me. Is, I'm going to be one of those guys in heaven being like, hey, can I go exploring? I'm going to go down to the deepest parts of the ocean if it's still around, and I'm going to go into outer space if that's possible, because I love exploring, and I've got the rest of eternity to explore, and I'll be like, you want to come with me, Jesus, and explain some of this stuff? So that to me is a very reasonable answer biblically as to why space is so huge. But it brings us to there were other beings that God created. In Job, it says, when God began creation, the sons of God shouted for joy at the creation of the world. And so that's one verse it seems to indicate that during the creation, there were actually God and then other beings watching and celebrating the creation. God was showcasing to them his power. He actually does that with Adam in Genesis chapter 2. He takes him and creates the Garden of Eden in front of Adam, it seems to indicate, which is pretty fascinating. So these beings, they are what I would call interdimensional beings. So they're not outside of time, matter, and energy like God is. But they're not quite bound to the stuff we're bound to. I would say we are in-dimensional beings. We're subject to time, matter, and energy, physical laws. But these beings, being spiritual, would not be bound to some of these things. They are what I call super durable, long-lived. Because I think anything that God creates, he could also destroy. So and it's interesting, if you do a search in the Old Testament about the destruction of supernatural beings, there's some interesting references to God actually destroying supernatural beings at the end. Even one of the prophecies of the Shining One, of Satan, in Ezekiel 28 or Isaiah 14 says, fire will come from within you and consume you, and you will be no more. And I read that and I was like, you'll be no more? Does that mean that Satan's going to get cast into the lake of fire and he's going to be devoured and he will be no more? Wow, that's, it's interesting to research that. So, but anyway, so what about all these experiences that these people are having with aliens and the biblical concept of angels, demons, supernatural beings being interdimensional? And there's actually, once I go back to the research of Michael Heiser, he's a Hebrew scholar, and I don't agree with him on everything, but he's done some really good research into different UFO alientologists, as they are, and one of the predominant explanations for aliens is they are interdimensional beings. It's like their ships show up, can do crazy stuff, and then boom, disappear. And it's like, what just happened? So there's an element of this interdimensionality to them, which really fits but well with the biblical explanation for supernatural beings. The other thing that I found interesting when I watched some of his videos was a lot of the testimony from abductees or people that experience alien presence is the message these aliens bring is anti-Jesus and anti-biblical. They either say Jesus was one of us, so come follow us, or don't listen to the Jesus Bible stuff. I'll help you ascend to godhood, essentially. So why would physical beings travel billions of light years to come poo-poo a false religion if that's what they think Christianity was? Why would Jesus be a target of aliens, essentially?
Right.
So that is a very fascinating thing. And then, like if you watch some of the videos of the alienresistance.org, there's been testimony of people who've had this alien presence and they'll cry out the name of Jesus. And the alien will turn around and be like, don't say that. It like freezes the aliens in their place. Or if they start praying, they disappear. So there's a very interesting tie and connection of these beings to that. And if you think about it, our culture has become naturalistic. Our education is naturalistic. But in our entertainment, we're supernaturalistic and even more superstitious than the Greeks and the Romans were at times. If you think about, everything from werewolves, demons, zombies, and stuff like that.
Even superhero movies have introduced supernatural, interdimensional.
Doctor Strange is a great example.
It's even in our comic books, it's interdimensional
Thor
stuff.
I mean, Thor is a demigod. He's the son of a god, kind of, Odin. And they would just call this advanced technology. But that's what people say with the aliens kind of thing too. So if you love exploring this, I have to recommend this book before we wrap up. This is called The Facade. See if you can see it there. This is written by Michael S. Heiser. He has a second book called The Portent, and he's working on his third. He has a full-time job, and he has his kind of ministry. That's one of the reasons I like him, because he's a busy guy, just like I'm trying to be. But The Facade, he kind of bases the story loosely on himself. This Hebrew scholar who doesn't have a whole lot going for him, lots of problems in his life, gets abducted by a dark ops government group. And basically the government is like, we're gonna do full disclosure. There's aliens here. So that's his fictional part. But he gives a lot of stuff from the Majestic documents to other things. And so a lot of the material he uses is real in his story. And the Hebrew and the biblical stuff he quotes is real too. So it's like fiction, almost not fiction, which makes it even more fascinating. So this guy gets abducted, and I'm going to kind of spoiler alert, so if you don't want to know the end of it, plug your ears. But for The Facade, they actually, the government brings out, well, it's kind of cloak and dagger. This group, there's like scientists, and this guy's a theologian. He's like, what am I doing with this group? And it slowly comes out, okay, there's UFO. They actually take a trip in a UFO, which is pretty cool, that the government's developed. But his basic premises is that certain people have been in link with supernatural beings and gotten knowledge, even technology from these supernatural beings to create some of the technologies we have today.
Oh, wow.
And beyond. Kind of the dark ops side of the government. And so it's not just humans making UFOs, but humans, even the Nazis, doing experiments trying to create gravity drives and crazy stuff like that, but we needed help.
Right.
And so people have aligned themselves with supernatural beings to get that help, which is not that far-fetched, because Satanists align themselves with supernatural beings to get knowledge. They want to become immortal. It's the same thing as Satan offered Adam and Eve. He said, I'm going to give you illumination, immortality, and rulership. And whether you're seeking that through being a Satanist or in a scientific way, I think Satan's going to be like, I gotcha. Yeah. And what greater way to distract people than to pass yourself off as aliens? So Heiser kind of really explores this in his novels. And so it's really fascinating. I'm not going to spell out too much more, but essentially they meet a gray alien that's telepathic, but they start realizing it's not really a real physical alien. It's being inhabited by something. And he goes into that every time a demon inhabits somebody, a Christian comes along and kicks him out. Isn't that annoying if you're a supernatural being? So would the supernatural beings want to create avatars that they could inhabit that weren't really human? They were synthetic beings, but they would bring them to life. And what do we see in the end times and prophecy? There's going to be an image, something that's created that's going to be inhabited by a supernatural entity that's going to come to life. So he's kind of layering some of these things on there. And he's also saying, hey guys, could end times prophecy have something this great delusion? What could bring all the religions of the world together?
A belief in
aliens, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
interdimensional beings.
The Roman Catholic Church has already made an announcement. If aliens show up, they're good with it. So
they'll embrace it.
Yeah, they'll embrace it, in a sense. And so what could bring all the religions of the world together? We don't see any of that happening. I mean, there's Unitarianism, which is trying to bring them together, but the Islamic people aren't playing, the radical Islam aren't playing nice as far.
Yeah, you're not seeing a huge you're not seeing a lot of success in that effort. To bring together the people of the world under one religious banner. You're seeing more division than you are unification.
Right. And Heiser hasn't played this all out in his novels yet, but he's going to a place where a lot of Christian, even the creation ministries and Alien Intrusion movie, plays off this facade. Demons are masquerading as aliens to distract people from God. What if aliens actually showed up and tried to pass themselves off as gods or something like that? But Heiser takes it a step further and says, they're really smart. They're going to play us. They're going to bring an alien intrusion, and we're going to be like, oh, Jesus is going to come back and destroy them. That's what a lot of Christians would kind of assume. But he's like, what if the demons produce their own Messiah that deals with this alien threat, wipes them out, unifies the planet because they've just destroyed this alien menace, and everybody worships this guy, and even the Christians are duped into thinking this is the Messiah, this is Jesus' return, but it's really an alien puppet still. What if that's the great delusion? So he takes it a step. He takes it even a step further than most alien conspiracist Christians do, and says they're going to play us. They're just like we see in a lot of politics. They create the problem and then present their solution to it. They're like, we need a catastrophe so we can provide our solution to it. So what if the supernatural beings are playing that game? So that's a really kind of fascinating place to kind of explore and go in that and stuff. So that's kind of that's kind of our exploration tonight.
Very good.
Of that, and I think Michael Heiser is a great resource for kind of delving into the biblical understanding of that. He goes a lot more into depth. He has a very supernatural worldview. One of his best book on this is called The Unseen Realm, and he goes deeply into the Bible, kind of bringing out something I love is called the visible Yahweh, where God shows up in physical form, commissions prophets, hangs out with Abraham, hangs out with Gideon, appears before slave girls that are running away. What's her name? Abraham and Sarah. They send Hagar. Yeah, and she has a vision of God. She's like, I've seen God and didn't die. Isaac wrestles with a physical being, and later he says that was God when he's blessing Joseph's children and stuff. And so Heiser brings out all these instances where you have two beings at the burning bush. One is inside the bush and one's outside the bush. God is revealing himself as the Godhead to these people, which is really amazing. So that's one of the elements that I love about Heiser's work, is bringing out the visible Yahweh or the Godhead in the Old Testament. And the Jews even believed in the two powers in heaven. You have Daniel chapter 7, where we have the Ancient of Days. The Son of Man comes before the Ancient of Days. He's riding in the clouds. Who's the cloud rider? Yahweh is the cloud rider. But the Son of Man is coming in the clouds. And what does he receive from the Ancient of Days? Power and the nations of the world.
He inherits the nations.
Yeah.
I will give you the nations.
Yes. And you see this theme of Jesus reclaiming the nations, even in the New Testament, where he sends out his 70 disciples to the nations to reclaim them. Right. And he's going to reclaim all the nations and bring them. And we see that finally happening with the rapture, the resurrection, the end times kind of stuff. So Heiser in The Unseen Realm takes you through this supernatural story and ties it to Jesus and his ministry, which is really fascinating too. So, yeah, and shows that it still all comes back to Jesus, because he's the creator that got life started, and then he's the one who's going to bring it to its culmination. And I always tell people, if you can't believe in supernatural creation, you're never going to believe in the resurrection, because what's harder?
Right.
Creation supernaturally, or God bringing everybody that ever lived back to life from nothing, pretty much. Those have been cremated, eaten by sharks, you know.
Well, yeah, well, the Bible says that the ocean will give up its dead.
Yeah.
There's nothing left of those people right now.
Yeah.
So he has to reassemble a lot.
Yeah. And so that's, I mean, I love that about being a supernaturalist, because we can explore creation, explore these issues, but having God as the ultimate being. And it's funny because I actually did a blog on this. You can check out my blog at OriginsUnited.com blog. I did a blog on SETI. You know, it's the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And I'm like, they're getting slapped in the face by evidence of a creator, and they're still looking for these little guys running around sending them a message. When DNA is one of the craziest messages we've ever gotten. And the Bible, you know, prophecy. God tells people in Isaiah chapter 48 is one of my favorite passages, because he says, ask your gods if they can tell the end from the beginning. You know, he's basically daring the Hebrew people to look around and say, does any other being, can he tell the end from the beginning? Can he predict things? And that's one of the greatest evidences of the Bible being inspired is prophecy. Is we have this outer dimensional being who is outside of time, space, and he knows everything. There's a cool passage, I don't know the passage in the Old Testament, but Heiser talks about this, where David is running from Saul. He goes into the city, and he basically asks God, is Saul going to come here? Will these people give me up to Saul? And he asks a priest, and he hears back from God, and God's like, yeah, if you stay here, the people will give you up to Saul. What does David do? He leaves. Saul never comes to that city. The people never give him up. But God knew what could have happened, but he didn't determine that it would happen. That's because he knew it, because he's outside of time. And that to me is really cool and fascinating. Awesome. We see that example in the Old Testament. So anyway, any last questions or thoughts?
Thank you, David. This has been, you've really helped me to see some of the possible connections between, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, alien belief and the Bible, and how it is relevant and how it is something to keep on our radar, I think, as discerning Christians.
What a great witnessing tool.
Of deception.
And a great, all these people who say they've experienced something or just even fascinated with Star Trek and aliens and stuff, what a great witnessing tool into these people's lives.
That's right.
To ask them, well, could these be interdimensional beings? Well, do you know the Bible talks about other beings besides humans?
Right.
And boom, there's your in to start witnessing to people and be like, I know the ultimate alien. He's outer dimensional. He's a non-biological entity. He's crazier than any alien that's ever been thought up of. Because nobody's ever actually, it would be interesting if people, you can't really make a movie of an outer dimensional being necessarily, but people have tried to come close to outside of time things. With Solaris, I think, was a movie that tries to kind of play with that concept, but nobody's really ever tried to portray or grasp an outer dimensional being.
Right.
So that's where I'm like, hey, we have made contact with the ultimate alien. He is other than us. He says, I am holy. I am way different from you guys. He's a Godhead. He's a Trinity. That's a pretty alien concept to us too, and that just heightens that cool wonder. C.S. Lewis talked a lot about the mystery of God and how if you take away the mystery of something, it becomes kind of dead and flat. And that's what
nobody wants to know about it.
Yeah. And so bringing that mystery even back into Christianity, that's why I love to help students explore kind of this supernatural world stuff, because it brings in the mystery of God and creation and our destiny as well.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
So, I'll turn this off.